All right, let's get into it. We're going to start with a butterfly. So we bring the soles of the feet in. Okay, so in today, because we're looking to stretch the groin. And then the upper body, we bring forward and down. And as always, with these forward folds, I recommend a nice relaxed approach that tends to be both the most effective and the safest way. Now, there can be exceptions to every rule. So my recommendation is if you think you're that exception, before you go ahead and like yank or pull yourself down or, try and be really aggressive, why don't we have a chat first? I think that that's the wise thing to do. One of the things you learn pretty quickly when you teach yoga, at least my experience has been, is you really don't have control over what students do. I mean, you can yell at them, you can try shaming them, you can try throwing them out of class, whatever. But I mean, honestly, you have very limited control as a yoga teacher. People are paying to be there. They're there voluntarily. They're adults. It's up to them. So what I try and do is just educate, explain to you why you should listen to me. But you might decide that those aren't good reasons. And so you are free to do whatever you want to do. All I can do is try and advise. So heels in close, coming forward and down. The stretch should be here. Okay, groin, adductors. Now again, if this doesn't work, if you don't feel that, you let me know. There are other ways that we could do this, but again, part of the reason I choose this flow today is so we can try to do things a little differently. Maybe this isn't my first choice groin stretch ever, but that's why I put it in this flow. Because for someone else, it might be perfect. It might be the only groin stretch they can do safely. It might help them access a different part of their body. So many reasons to change things up, to not always do things, even what we think is the best way, right? So even though I have my opinions about stretches that I think are best or most effective for large groups of people, those that are most effective for me, I still like to change it up from time to time, okay? To just stay curious and stay, inquisitive and be open, right, to trying. When we think we know something, we're not open anymore, right? A lot of people like to talk about having an open mind, but if you talk with those people, you find they're very closed-minded about a lot of things, okay? That's the truth. So a lot of people identify as having an open mind, right? A lot of yoga people especially will say, oh no, I'm open-minded. I'm loving, I'm accepting, I'm tolerant. But if you talk with those same people, you find they are intolerant of certain opinions. They are intolerant of certain maybe ways of approaching, practicing, or teaching. They are intolerant of many things. So tolerance is kind of a big thing. We're tolerant of things or we aren't, right? So you might find yourself intolerant or, intolerant of intolerance, which seems like a little bit of a funny pickle, right? You're like, I'm tolerant, so I'm intolerant of those who are intolerant. Well, now you're intolerant. So are you really any different, right? If you reject the intolerant. I get it. It's very tempting if you're tolerant to say, oh, those who don't have tolerance, I don't have time for them. I don't have energy for them. They don't get it. But what you're doing is you're actually being intolerant. So this posture, we want to feel it here, nice and relaxed. Feel free to use support anytime in the practice, but make sure that the support does not take you away from feeling this stretch. Now we're already many minutes into this, so the stretch may have dissipated, and that's normal and that's natural, that's to be expected. So that's not a problem if at this point you don't really feel much stretch anymore. That's totally okay, all right? All right, let's go ahead and come on up, and we'll do another posture before we rest for a little longer. So this is the next one. Looks like this. Okay, so this is the dragonfly. Now, many people have trouble with this posture where they feel like they're being pulled backwards. Okay, so notice if you're doing this, that's probably you. So what you'd like is to sit on something, maybe bend your knees until you feel like gravity is pulling you forward into the stretch. And that should be felt again in here, probably a bit different, maybe a little more intense. Okay, and so we come forward and down. We feel it in here, nice and relaxed. We're effortless again. Use support if necessary. So again, support is when I'm talking about not going quite so deep. But props can also be used to take us deeper. So again, sitting on a block, right? If you feel like you're being pulled back, that can help get you into it a little more intensely, if that's what you're looking for, okay? Also, blocks under the knees, supporting the blocks under your knees, okay? That might help you with that as well. So nice and relaxed, just a stretch right in here, easy. And as we did with the last posture, we'll be here for 5 minutes. We're already 1 minute into this one, and this is the dragonfly again. So in here, these are our adductors and groin muscles, and this is liver channel for the Taoist. So the Taoists identified 12 to 14, depending on how you kind of look at it, channels that run through the body that they determined that they felt were really essential and really important for vitality, for health, for longevity, and also spiritual development. All those things kind of get mixed together at a certain point. It's not to say that you can't change your emphasis on one or the other. So, you know, some people who do yoga, they're really interested in the fitness, what they consider the fitness side of it. They're just sort of interested in being healthy, being, you know, physically the best they could be. They're not that interested in like deep existential questions like, who am I? What is the meaning of life? What are we doing here? You know, can we love unconditionally? These might be more spiritual questions that we ponder. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a spiritual teacher, but I don't really believe that people should be interested in spirituality. I think that's really a personal thing, whether you feel interested or not. I personally am, obviously, but I don't really, you know, have this idea of like anyone needs to do anything. It's kind of up to you. Having said that, I do think from what I've seen, and again, this is just my personal experience, from what I've seen without some kind of spiritual foundation, I think it's really hard to stay mentally, emotionally healthy. I think it's really easy to, you know, just end up at some very dark places sooner or later. You know, you right now you might be like riding high, and that's great. You know, no spirituality, no religion, you know, no psychotherapist. You're just, yeah, I rock, you know, life is great. I've been there, certainly. You know, when you're young, it's I think easier to get into that space. You're kind of like, I have my whole life ahead of me, body's healthy, feeling good, things are exciting, right? You meet somebody new at a party, and there's chemistry, and you know, your just mind goes into the future of like, oh, what is this going to bring me? So I think that's a little easier when you're younger. As you get a little older, you know, you maybe have some experiences where you're like, I've been down that road. I've met that person at the party and dated them, and maybe I've even married them and had kids with them. And I know that that doesn't lead to this happy, blissful state that lasts. There will be moments, but then there's kind of a ebb and flow. Now, so when we're in the up side of it, it's really tempting for us to think we've got it figured out. But in my experience, most human lives, you can't ride that top of the wave forever. It just really doesn't seem to happen for anybody. Whether it's life bringing us down or just our own, you know, sort of nervous system, it just doesn't seem possible. And so what happens when we come down? And what I found, again, as a spiritual teacher, a lot of times that's when people get interested in spirituality. When we hit those kind of lows, oh, I'm getting divorced, and I never thought I would get divorced. I lost my child, and you never imagined that I would lose a child. My father died, and I feel lost without him. Okay, let's go ahead and come on out of that, and we'll rest for a moment. And this is called a rebound, and it's actually a really important part of the practice. So notice if you're already kind of doing one of these and trying to shake off the sensations. Instead, I'm going to invite you, and again, all I can do is invite you to do this. I can't force you. You just relax back and be still and feel. Now, many people are resistant to feeling their bodies. Usually the people who are most resistant to feeling their bodies report that they don't feel anything in their body. So that's one tip off. If you're like, yeah, I don't feel anything, that's a tip off that you've probably disassociated from your body. Now, it's important. Doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you evil, doesn't make you unspiritual, but it's just something to recognize. It's sort of like if you cut your finger, right? You may need to tend to that. It doesn't make you a bad person or evil. It just means, oh, I cut my finger. I might need to take care of that. So just relax and feel what you can feel. Again, there may be a sense that there's really nothing there. Okay, and that's okay. You might feel sensations or energy moving. And oftentimes just by relaxing more and putting aside the thought, there's nothing there, you might find that actually there's a lot of subtle things happening that you could tune into. All right, now let's counter stretch. Bring those legs in, just move around a little bit, shake it off, just gently, easy. Good. And then we'll hinge up to seated. This helps stabilize the hips and spine. So hands under the hips, palms down. Take those legs up. Now, if there's any pain in your back, you're going to bend those knees till that pain subsides. Very common. So don't be surprised. But if it feels okay, legs are straight. Lift the head and neck. Take a deep breath. Exhale, lower those legs. And then inhale and exhale. Okay? So nice way to come up to seated and also help stabilize the hips and spine. So there's a purpose behind that. Okay, half butterfly. So right leg is straight, left foot comes to the inside of the thigh. And then we relax the upper body forward and down. Okay. And so we're here, we're just looking for a stretch back here, back of the right thigh. Okay. Nice and easy. Again, feel free to use support under the forehead, forearms, left knee. That's support, right? Or to go deeper, you might sit on a block. You might put a block under the knee. If again, you're one of these, very, very common. Again, it's not about judgment. It's not about I need to feel bad or guilty because I have tight hamstrings. That's silliness. So just recognize if that's what's happening, it's okay. And all you want to do is do what's necessary. And so what's necessary might be a block here or a rolled blanket sitting up on something. Okay, so again, we're already about a minute into 5 minutes here. We want to feel it here. We want to feel that this is safe for our body. So I have a student, she had a knee replacement recently, so this might bother her as just an example, right? So she may not be able to put her leg in that position. She might need to support this leg. If you've had a spinal fusion or surgery or back injury recently, this might be unsafe. So again, using support as necessary, but still hopefully finding that stretch. So for the Taoists, this is the kidney urinary bladder meridian. Now I do want to say something about the names of those meridians. They have the names of organs because in classical Chinese medicine, the organs represented certain functions. Now, classical Chinese medicine is a holistic approach to health. So in the West, we, for the most part, don't have a holistic approach anymore. We have an approach that is very divided. So you go see an eye doctor, you see a spine doctor, you see a brain doctor, you see a psychologist for your emotions. Everything is kind of separated out, for better or for worse. I'm not here to, criticize or say I know how it should be. I'm just sort of drawing out the differences. So ancient systems like the Taoist system that gave birth to classical Chinese medicine, which is different than traditional Chinese medicine, just so you know, there is a difference. So what we call traditional Chinese medicine, at least according to my teacher, Paul Grilly, it's not actually that traditional. That's kind of a name or a label. It doesn't mean that's actually what it is. So I tend to use the word classical Chinese medicine because we find a lot of Western influence in traditional Chinese medicine. It's still very different than Western medicine, but there's a lot of influence in the thinking and the approach of a TCM practitioner versus the classical approach to Chinese medicine. So the classical approach is holistic. And what that means is these functions like kidney and urinary bladder, they're going to affect you physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So for them, again, there wasn't this division. In our country, right, you go to a doctor, that doctor could be Muslim or Jewish or Christian or Hindu or Buddhist or agnostic or atheist, and you just go and they just do their thing on you. And they don't talk about religion, they don't talk about faith, they don't talk about spirituality. That doesn't factor in, right? Your body is like a little machine, and that doctor is going to operate on the mechanics of the machine. That would be surgery, or she's going to operate on the chemicals, the biochemistry of the machine, which is drugs, pharmaceuticals. Let's switch sides. Okay, so the second side. Nice and relaxed, feeling the stretch in the back of the left thigh, okay? So, again, I'm not here to tell you that that's bad or wrong or evil or ignorant or we shouldn't do it. I'm just pointing out differences. So this is where we are with the West. Everything is separated out, and the doctor is not going to bring up that maybe you're having a spiritual crisis. That's why you have so much back pain. Okay, that's not the doctor's place. The doctor is going to suggest physical and chemical solutions. That's all she's been trained to do. And she's spent a lot of time training to do that. And some of you know my ex and still good friend is a surgeon. So I have somewhat of an intimate knowledge of what doctors go through and what they face there. But my ex, she's the first one to say that actually, you know, the spiritual side of it is really important. And she brings that into her practice in very subtle ways, in ways that probably most of her patients don't even notice. So I have 2 students, I actually have more students than that, but I have 2 students who are doctors who shared with me that once they started doing meditation with me and studying with me, it changed the way they dealt with their patients, which I really was honored to hear. So prior to learning meditation and studying with me, they would just try and rush through their interaction with the patient as quickly as they could, because doctors are super busy and their time is super valuable, right? They bill like at a really high rate, like, you know, I don't know, hundreds or maybe even thousands of dollars in an hour. So if a person is there and they're upset about something, right? It's sort of like, okay, how does your knee feel? Is it good or bad? Is it better today? Are you, you know, what's your stool like? Is your stomach upset? Are you having headaches? You know, check out everything off the box. And then next patient, right? Because you're busy. You don't have time to listen to their story, right? It's like it's a car that's come in for repair. And it's like, I'm going to look at the car, the body. I don't want to hear the story of the owner, whether, you know, she's having a hard time, whether she's upset about the car breaking down, what's going on in her life. I don't have time for that. She can go to her psychotherapist and listen to that. I'm just here to work on the body. Well, these 2 doctors, what they reported to me is that they now spend more time with their patients, sometimes hours, listening to their patients. And I think this is an important shift. I think this is an important change. And the question really is what heals us? Is it actually the operation? Is it actually manipulating the physical stuff? Is that what's really important? Or is it the presence of the practitioner and their willingness to be open and to listen and to connect emotionally, right? Connect spiritually. And again, in the West, we almost want to say, no, spiritual, no, that doesn't exist. We can't prove it. We don't see it. So we all know we have emotions. We all know we have thoughts. We all know we have a body, right? At least. In the West, we tend to discount emotions a lot, right? And even thoughts to some degree. So a lot of insurance will pay for you to have surgery and to get drugs, but they won't pay for you to see an analyst or a psychotherapist. If you're emotionally distraught, that's kind of your problem. That's not a health problem. It's not a real health problem. You're just kind of messed up in the head. And so this goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier, is I find that many people who don't find a spiritual underpinning that works for them, that life can lead them to a very, very dark place. Now, sometimes you plug in with a spiritual community or a teacher, and that doesn't serve you, and it can actually take you to a darker place. But we'll discuss that maybe another time. All right, let's unwind here. And again, the invitation is just to feel. Take your time, relax, unwind, and see if you can just feel whatever's there in the body. You might notice if there's maybe subtle or not so subtle resistance to feeling. Sometimes it shows up as resistance to being still. Because oftentimes when we are really relaxed and still, we begin to notice very subtle things that are happening. So notice if there's like, if you're like, oh, now's the perfect time for me to take a sip of tea or check on my dog or whatever it is. Can you just not do anything and just feel sensations in the body? Now, it may not be sensations in the body that comes up. It could be emotions. It could be a thought that you don't want to look at, right? Maybe you had a fight with somebody and that keeps coming into awareness and you're like trying to do yoga to push that away. See if you can just allow it. Allow it to come up. All right. Let's bring our legs in, give them a little squeeze. Shake it out. And then we will hinge up. Okay, here's another place where this departs from some of my usual sequences. Usually I would change body position here. That's my inclination. I don't like doing forward fold after forward fold after forward fold. Like I said, what's good for me is not necessarily good for everyone else. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. It's kind of against my own inclination here. So we'll do a square pose. The way to do that, the simplest version, is just a cross-leg position, and you come forward and you want to feel it out here in your buttocks. Maybe both, but usually the front leg is the one you'll feel, so the right leg on this side. If that's not enough, you can try this. So this is just a little more intense rotation, and that potentially gives you a more intense stretch. It certainly does for me. This feels nice, intense in a good way. Final option is if you're feeling it here and not out here, it's just pinching here, then you can try this. Looks like that. And you come forward and down like so. All right. And then again, we're feeling it out there. And this is called a shoelace. The other one's called a square. I'm going to do the square today because that just suits my body where I am with it today. So it's interesting, in Western medicine, there are at least some people within that field, like my ex, who are trying to make inroads to integrating the other aspects of our experience as human beings into the healing process. So she calls what she's doing integrative surgery, right? So again, there's this idea of integration, the integrating of the whole self. Because again, unless we are just in complete denial, we know that we have more than just a physical experience, right? In fact, for most of us, I don't care if you're a man or a woman, a lot of times people think men, aren't in touch with their emotions and, they don't have emotions, or they're more rational or logical. I understand why people say that, but it's really not true. Men are very often, they're disembodied, but they still have emotions. They just don't maybe recognize them or understand what they're feeling. So a lot of men go from like numb to angry. That's the emotion that's acceptable for a man to feel. And for most men, it happens in very subtle ways, and no one's doing it intentionally. Okay, so you have to understand that. So if you're a mother or, something like that, you might bristle at the idea that, you're doing this to your son. And I'm not saying that you are. That's for you to determine. I'm just telling you or reporting what happens to many men is in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways, men are taught that, it's not really okay to be in touch with your emotions, to feel your emotions. But anger, people will respond to from a man. So a man gets upset, angry, people are, oh, okay, let's listen, let's stop, let's change something, he's angry. So it's unfortunate, but again, this isn't just my opinion. I didn't just come up with this. And like I always point out, my opinion doesn't really mean that much, and I change my opinion all the time. So if you disagree, it's totally fine. Doesn't upset me, and I'm happy to listen to how I'm mistaken about that. But again, there's a lot of evidence to this. There have been books written about it. A book on emotional intelligence talks a lot about the state of affairs with men. So again, there are people much smarter, much more learned, who've studied this in much more depth than I have, who are saying exactly the same thing. So it's pretty common for men, but it doesn't mean they don't experience emotions or have emotions. But regardless, we have an emotional life as human beings. And for most of us, that again guides us more than what makes sense. I think so many of us like to believe that we're logical or, we just follow what makes sense. But what's often the case is we actually go backwards. We try and justify what we think, what we believe, or what we feel, and then we make logical, intellectual justifications for it. All right, let's switch sides. Very, very common. And again, you might be thinking, oh, I never do that. I think that's what most people like to believe. Some people recognize they're very emotional, and then they think that they're not, logical, or they're not guided by their thinking. But I think also that's untrue. So it's tricky, but I like the yogic way of looking at it. It's sort of heart-mind. And for me, that really works. Heart-mind, body-mind. There really isn't this separation of our emotional life and our mental life as we like to think. And I think that's a very Western idea. And that may play into, some of you here are from Scott's group, and that may play into what Scott talks about when he talks about the Cartesian split. This sort of idea that there are these two worlds and never shall they meet, right? I'm logical. I'm not guided by, how I feel or whatever. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Again, I can understand why people might think or believe that, but it's really not true. As human beings, we're very much guided ultimately by how we feel about things. Like some people who believe themselves to be logical, if you get emotional around them and you show emotion and you say, I'm guided by emotion, they might actually get upset with you because they're like, you need to be logical. Well, that's not logical, is it? You're getting upset. You're getting emotional about logic. So again, it's very funny how we human beings, we have these ideas about ourselves, about the world, about the mind, about the heart that really don't line up with reality. So if I get emotional about someone getting getting emotional, I'm getting emotional. It's sort of like what I said earlier about if I'm intolerant of the intolerant, I'm joining that camp, right? So you really have to be careful with these ideas. Oh, I'm tolerant. Then you meet someone who's intolerant and you get upset at them, right? And you start yelling and screaming at them about being intolerant. You should be more tolerant. What's wrong with you? Can't you see? That's intolerance. That is intolerance right there. You are being intolerant of intolerance. So it can be very, very tricky when we try and take on these ideas. I'm logical. I'm not guided by emotion. Then you meet someone who's being very irrational, someone who's being very emotional. You start getting upset. That's emotion. That's not logic. Okay? So again, we as human beings, we experience all of these things, whether we acknowledge it or not. The part that I was speaking about toward the beginning of the class was this spiritual aspect of ourselves. And whether or not you have found a outlet for that in your life, some people grow up with religion. I don't really consider religion and spirituality the same thing. I think all religions have their roots in spirituality, but depending on the religion, depending on the group, depending on who's leading that group, religion can have very little to do with spirituality at times. So it really depends, a case-by-case basis. I can't say, Muslims aren't spiritual, or Christians aren't spiritual, or Jews aren't spiritual, or Buddhists aren't spiritual. It really, or the opposite. Oh, Buddhists are spiritual, or Taoists are spiritual. It really depends on the group. Who's leading this group? And when I say leading, I often mean on an intimate level, like who, if you go to your church, who is the pastor or minister at that church? What do they talk about in their sermons? That's going to make all the difference of whether or not you're really dealing with religion, which for me is mostly about dogma, about belief. And there's a huge difference between belief, a system of belief, what I believe in, versus spiritual experience. And so spirituality is about experience, experiencing for oneself, not after you die, not in your next life, experiencing now, here, in the present moment. All right, let's go ahead and unwind from that. Make our way onto the back, and let's just, again, rebound, relax, and feel. It's a great question to ask when you're doing that. Is there anything I'm trying to avoid feeling, seeing, or knowing in this moment? Just acknowledging if there is. And remember, things like impatience and boredom are forms that resistance takes. All right, let's bring those legs in. We'll give them a little squeeze. If we had more time, we could rest there longer, but we're on a schedule. All right, so shake it out, and then when you're ready, come on up to seated. Last set is what we call a saddle, and this can be a challenging posture for some people at least. So we take the right leg, we fold it back. Okay, now the toes can point straight back, the toes can point out to the side, the knee can point straight ahead, the knee can point out to the side. I can sit directly on the ground, I could sit on a block or even a stack of blocks. Okay, really, really up to you. Okay, I want to feel a stretch here today. This is the main course. It's your quads, your quadricep, stomach, spleen for the Taoist. Okay. So if you feel it sitting here, then you don't need to do anything else. You can just sit here. This is a really good therapeutic stretch already. If you don't feel it, and I don't, so you can begin with this, just coming back onto your hands, leaning back a little bit. And then if you're still not feeling it, elbows. I just begin to feel it a little bit here. Now, feel free to put something behind you, like a big pillow, what we call in yoga a bolster. You can even prop a bolster at an angle. I've done that before with a block and a bolster at an angle, and I lay back on that. You're welcome to do that. Or you might come all the way back onto the crown of your head or flat on your back like I'm doing here. Okay. What we want to avoid is feeling like the knee is being compromised, the ankle, or the back. And those are the three kind of weak links in this posture, you might say. Those are the areas where we risk injury if we're not doing this skillfully. So take your time, be patient, and again, if you're having a really hard time, we can chat. Maybe better for us to chat after class, though. So we can really break it down, take the time to see what the problem is. Okay? So just take it, make sure you stay safe, and just a little bit of stretch there. Now, if you're like me, you might be all the way in your back and you're still not feeling it. So bending the left knee, that foot on the ground like that might do it. Dropping the left knee out to the side, that does it for me. Like I feel a nice stretch here now. But if that's still not enough, some people will even do this, grab that leg, pull it in. Some people will even straighten the leg, and I don't need to go even close to that. So I'm not a good example, but some people actually sort of pull that leg up into a split. Okay, so those people aren't better. They just have to go further to find that therapeutic stretch. So again, please remember that, keep that in mind. This is not a competition to see who's most flexible. And the most flexible person doesn't win. There's no prize. They're not a better yogi, anything like that. So let's take all of those ideas and just put them off to the side. So stomach spleen channel for the Taoist. And again, although they have the name stomach and spleen, and yes, it does affect those organs from our kind of Western perspective, you want to be careful about thinking that that's all that is doing. So the different organs represent functions in Chinese medicine. And so the function of stomach and spleen is digestion, integration, right? Breaking things down and making that a part of ourselves. As I've already pointed out, sure, we have a physical experience, right? So stomach, your physical stomach, you take in food and it goes down to the stomach and the stomach begins to break that apart, right? To digest it. It's the first kind of level of digestion there. And so stomach spleen energy, if we think in terms of emotions, right? Think of an event that happens to you, an emotional event. Let's say, for instance, my father passed away at the beginning of the pandemic. That was an emotional event for me, for sure. There was a lot of emotion that came with that event. Now, if I did not have balanced stomach spleen qi, and balance is important. You can have too much and you can have too little, right? So if I didn't have balanced stomach spleen qi, then when that happened to me, there's a good chance that either I would feel no emotion, right? Or the other side of it is that maybe I have emotion, but it just lingers and lingers and lingers and lingers. It never gets digested. It never becomes a part of me, right? So our emotional life becomes a part of who we are, so to speak, as human beings, and that enriches us. But when we don't see emotional events in that way, when stomach and spleen is out, for instance, then we might not see it that way. We may not feel like we have the capacity to digest an emotional event. Then it doesn't become a part of us, right? And then we think of the death of our father and it comes up and we just get all, either we don't feel anything, oh yeah, whatever, you know, he died and we weren't close or whatever. Or again, we become incapacitated with maybe sadness or emotion. We find, you know, years after the event, we're still like breaking down every time we think of it. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Okay, so again, this is not about good person, bad person, anything like that. Sometimes when people hear me speak about this stuff, they take it that way. And so I try and be very careful that that's not what this is about. Again, this is about noticing, right? And the possibility that there might be a different way. So again, these types of things, if you're not called, if you're not interested, if you're like rolling your eyes and oh, that's so ridiculous, cool. Then, you know, just listen to this as like basically, you know, a crazy person talking or something. But I find there's a lot of wisdom in these traditions. They've been around for thousands of years and they're still with us. And I think there's a good reason for that because many people get a lot from these teachings. So mentally, a way of thinking of stomach and spleen. So I'm just trying to illustrate, again, the different aspects we have. We all know physically, right? If I eat something, if my stomach and spleen chi is out of balance, then I might vomit or I might have, you know, problem with digestion, the way something digests, something like that. Okay, can show up that way. Then emotionally, if there is imbalance, again, something happens, I feel a strong emotion, and I'm not able to feel balance with that, right? I either don't feel anything or it keeps coming up in, you know, really strong waves and overwhelming me, even maybe years and years and years later. And then mentally it can show up, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, sometimes I would have to study for a test and I might spend the whole night before cramming or the week before trying to memorize a bunch of stuff. And I would memorize enough, you know, to pass or sometimes even to get an A. And then sometimes by the time I got the test back with the grade on it, like my mind had almost purged all of that information. The formulas and, you know, whatever it is, a lot of that information had already gone. And even if that wasn't the case by the time you got your test back, you might find today, like if I ask you about a geography quiz you took in high school, like you might be like, oh yeah, I totally can't remember the capitals of every state anymore. And I got an A on that test. Or a math test, trigonometry or statistics, something you had learned. And now you recognize like, yeah, I no longer really have access to that information. Compare that with, say, you know, things that happened much earlier in childhood. If I ask you about, I don't know, Sesame Street or Grover or, you know, some character from a book that you read as a child, you might have like a really strong memory of that, right? So again, this is mentally, we can digest information. It becomes a part of who we are. But other information, even though we took it in, right? We memorized for the test. It was taken in. We held it in our memory, right? But it never really became a part of who we are. And then other things without effort. Maybe a song, right? You hear a song on the radio and it's like that melody goes right in and you could sing it like years later. Maybe you've even only heard it a few times, but these again are examples of that. So this happens again on every level, physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, and again, for the Taoist, for the yogi, there's definitely a spiritual side to being human as well. And even though, you know, Western science and medicine right now is still basically trying to deny that part of ourselves, again, there are people like my ex who are recognizing that that really isn't the optimal way forward, that Western medicine will only be enhanced by recognizing that spiritual side of ourselves. Now, again, that can be tricky because a lot of people have different ideas, different beliefs. You know, they grow up with different religions and things like that. So how do you recognize that, incorporate that without touching onto any, you know, one system or something like that? And so that's a challenge. And I don't really have an answer about that. But I think there are many smart, creative individuals who are working on that problem. Okay, let's go ahead and take our time. We'll come on out of that. Just relax, feel the sensations in the body. If there are emotions or thoughts there, just acknowledging them. You don't have to do anything with them right now. Again, just asking that question, can I be with what I'm feeling? Is there resistance to feeling it, to being with it? And if there is a yes, I'm resistant, or no, I can't be with that, that's okay. You just acknowledge that. Doesn't make you a bad person. Okay, let's pull those legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it off, a little movement. And then what I recommend, we're going to be parting ways here in a moment, but what I recommend you all do is grab your phone, set a 6-minute timer on it, and then come into what in yin we call a pentacle pose. Just a comfortable, relaxed position on your back. Your legs and arms can be wherever you really want. You close your eyes and you just allow 6 minutes to pass with stillness.